T. Falcon Napier. Welcome to the Circle of Brilliance. Today we're going to continue our discussion about culture. And today what we're going to do is look at the change grid and figure out where does a good, and you can put that in air quotes, where does a good culture reside on the change grid, and what makes that particular area supportive to a given kind of culture that may or may not work for the company. So we're going to discuss the relative benefits of various positions. I did want to finish one slide though before we got into it. Last time around, we talked about the 4 facets of leadership and talked about how ultimately the results of someone's assessment of their experience of the way that the organization is being read equals the culture of that organization as experienced by the individual. And so if we want to do something to improve the culture, we have to look at those 4 facets: family, future, focus, and facts, and then decide where do we need to reduce emphasis, where do we need to increase emphasis, what is the perfect blend for our organization in order to have a culture that's really going to be supportive and work for the outcomes we want to have. So when I first did this program, this was part of my program that I do on coaching skills for non-coaches or coaching skills for management professionals. And one of the things I say is that, how do you go about coaching it? Well, if you have an employee who is feeling as though the family is being neglected, how do you boost my sense of family? And again, we would be coaching then the manager on behalf of the employee. So what can you do to boost my sense of family? What can you do to create a future for me? What can you do to help me focus on the most important things? And what can you do to help me minimize the task of reporting and reviewing facts? So again, what we're trying to do here is to basically say to the manager that we're coaching, I'm speaking on behalf of your employees who, rated the organization as putting too much or too little emphasis on whichever one of the facets that we're coming into question with. But this is what it's really all about. What can the manager do, or what can the person who's in a position to make some changes do to help improve the way people are viewing the 4 different facets? And so these would be the 4 coaching questions I would suggest that they kind of start with. Okay, questions, comments about the 4 facets? Any other thoughts based on what we talked about last time around? All right, then we're going to go on to something new today, and that is we're going to take a look at the change grid. And I'm going to ask you guys to tell me where you think the ideal corporate culture, if such a thing even exists, where would it live? Now, in order to help you have the language for describing that, ultimately, if we take the change grid and divide it into its numerous layers, one of those layers divides it into these 4 quadrants that we call upgrid, outgrid, downgrid, ingrid. But we know that there's a certain energy that overlays on each one of those. So what is the main energy of the upgrid quadrant?
Main energy?
Yep, so we have this is the expressive energy. This is what that expressive energy wants to, that they want to experience life, feel what they're feeling, share what they're feeling, etc. Now, when that's used as a personality typing system, that's all fine. We don't use it as personality typing. We just say, look, there is this energy that's very expressive. And when we are performing certain activities, that expressive energy can be very helpful and supportive. And other times that expressive energy can be totally inappropriate and can actually undermine our desired outcome. Outgrid, what was the energy, primary energy we find out?
Driver.
This is the driver. So the driver wants to do what?
Get things done.
Get things done, go somewhere. They're driving. They want to get somewhere, get something accomplished, get something done. And so that's that. And again, there are personality tests that use these same labels, and those tests are perfectly fine, but we don't do personality typing. We instead just say, look, everybody has a driver energy. Certain activities people need to do benefit from having a driver energy running the show. And other times the driver energy is just inappropriate, overwhelming, or whatever. What energy do we find down grid? These are the people,
Analytical.
the analytical, very high perceived level of ability, relatively low perceived challenge. They know their stuff. They know their stuff forwards, backwards, and inside out. They are the keepers of all the facts. At least they think they're the keepers of all the facts. And so this is the analytical energy that more than anything wants to know something, wants to understand something, wants to master something. So that energy, again, could be right for certain activities, could be wrong for other activities. And then in grid, we have our fourth and final primary energy. That energy is what?
Amiable.
The amiable energy. The amiable energy wants to care about something. It operates a little bit more from a heart space. And that, again, could be right, could be wrong, depends on what the activity is all about. Now, we went on, as you guys think about your training, you went on to understand that there is not only a primary energy, there is also a secondary energy. That secondary energy just answers the question, how does someone go about accomplishing their desired outcome? And again, the driver desired outcome is to get something done, go somewhere, get something taken care of. How do they go about doing that? Well, a driven driver energy would get things to happen by, you want to guess, what do? How does a driven driver get something done?
Push.
Push. They get it done by getting it done. There's no excuses. There's no hesitations. They just push, 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 push. They push themselves. They push others. They're just wholly focused, blinders in place, get it all done, get it all done, get it all done. How does an expressive driver get things done?
Promoting it.
By promoting it, by being enthusiastic and being motivating and inspiring and energizing and all those expressive kinds of words. So they want to romance it and win you over to their way of thinking and awaken within you all kinds of excitement and desire and all that kind of stuff. So they definitely want to drive. They want to get something accomplished, but that energy believes that how you go about accomplishing it is by being enthusiastic and expressive in all its way. How does an analytical driver get to the desired outcome?
Presenting options.
Presenting options, yes, and ultimately, when they've made a choice, what might they present in support of that choice?
Data.
They got the data. That's the big thing about the analytical driver. They can see multiple ways of getting something accomplished. They can also assess which approach has, greater benefits to it or fewer problems with it, which one's going to be more efficient, more effective, whatever. But they tend to move something forward by being ready and often actively proving their point. So they got the data, they got the facts. Here's what the evidence shows. It's all very grounded in things that are very real, measurable, testable, provable kinds of stuff. By the way, they're also the ones that are most likely to say, I told you so. If the driven driver, expressive driver pushes things too hard or gets people too jazzed, they're going like, you should slow down. We can still get there, but there's issues. We've got to look at the issues. That's the analytical driver. They want things to happen, but they want things to happen in a way that makes sense, that follows what is known. And then we have the amiable driver. The amiable driver is still the driver. That drive energy wants to go somewhere, wants to do something, but that amiable secondary energy encourage them to do it. How? How does
Encouraging the team.
Encouraging the team, and this is more of an encouragement at the smaller group level or individual level, where the expressive driver might be encouraging, but they're more in front of the big audience. They're more about being inspiring. So even if they're giving words of encouragement, it's words of encouragement being given to the general audience, where the amiable driver wants to be more intimate about the whole thing. They want to really help the individuals to get what they need to get out of it, to see the benefits in doing it, to feel connected with the work, with one another, and on and on. You can kind of see how it all kind of comes together. Okay, so these are the four driver energies, and we could do something similar around the other quadrants. But what the question is for us today is, what is the energy of the ideal corporate culture? We've got some new people joining us today. So hi, T Waldman Williams is part of our group for a very long time. And so T's back with us. Hey, T.
Hey, thanks.
And let's
Thank
see,
you.
Nasir Bayan. Well, feel free to unmute yourself and tell
Oh,
us.
I thought I did.
Yes, Nasir, go ahead.
Oh, just wanted to acknowledge that acknowledgement and say, hey, team, happy to be here.
Great. And if I am correct, you are affiliated with, is it Tim or is it Boris?
Yes. It's Tim, colleague.
Oh, great. Okay. Yeah.
And I was on the Tuesday call and absolutely loved it.
I'm so glad. Well, feel free to chime in. This is the Circle of Brilliance. And so we appreciate any input from anyone who is joining us on the call. So if you've got something you'd like to share, don't hesitate. You probably don't have much awareness about the intricacies of the change grid, but we talk about it so much, you'll absorb it as we go along. But feel free to ask questions. Okay. All right. So the question at hand is there a perfect place on the change grid for where the right corporate culture would live? Now, just to kind of remind you, we did do a series on emotional intelligence. And I said, where on the change grid does emotional intelligence live? And you guys were able to identify 4 of these subquadrants that really resonate with emotional intelligence. And it's the driven expressive, the expressive driver, the amiable driver, the analytical expressive. This tended to be where all those qualities and attributes of emotional intelligence tended to live. And so if we weren't in that area, we were somewhere else on the change grid, our intelligence might be compromised, just might be a little bit confused at the moment. We might not be as responsible in our communications. So ultimately, if it's emotional intelligence we want to get to, then right there is where we want to be. Now, I threw that out because I read an article a couple of days ago that suggested that there was a direct connection between an organization's emotional intelligence scores and the positive ratings that employees give for corporate culture. So anyone want to chime in on that? I know a lot of you.
Oh, yeah, I would have to absolutely reinforce that. I mean, emotional intelligence, you get along, you accomplish things, you like your coworkers, you respond productively and appropriately. I mean, it's absolutely in line with a highly functioning corporate culture.
All right. Okay. So curious, other thoughts about that?
Yeah, Tia, I got a question because I'm a little bit confused about the question you're posing. So if I take it back to myself personally, when I look at, I'm typically a driver, but I can go from amiable to expressive to analytical at times and move around individually. But I know that within my organization, there are a lot of people that are nowhere near being that driver energy. They live in a completely different place all the time.
Yeah.
And so when we're talking about what's optimal for the culture, I think you have to look at, everybody, not. And so that's where I'm having difficulty reconciling the two things.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Is there a unique place on the change grid for the culture itself?
Oh, yeah. Well, that's the big debate that we're having. We don't know what the answer is quite yet. So, but
wouldn't culture be influenced by the type of organization it is?
Well, and that's going to be the gifted students question, because I'm going to say, well, if the standard hallmark example of a good corporate culture is located here on the change grid, well, how might we shift that around depending on the type of organization it is? Because like I said last time around, I don't believe there's any one perfect culture that would work in every setting. I think that the setting is very much going to impact the culture, and the culture is going to ultimately impact the setting as well. So we've got to make sure it's a good match for the work that needs to be done, for the people that are there, et cetera. But we're going to do this in kind of just, academic baby steps. So is there a perfect place on the change grid? Now, one thing I just want to bring to Boris's attention, Boris, remember that while we do believe that people have a personality, no argument at all. There's a lot of really great personality tests out there. And if you've tested out to be a whatever, well then fine, you're a whatever. We don't argue with that at all. What we do say though, is that every person, regardless of their personality type or their temperament or whatever psychometric tool you happen to be using, while everyone may test in their own unique kind of way there, the one thing we know for absolute certain is that every one of those people is in possession of a full change grid. And so I might be an analytical, but in my world, I have a whole change grid, which means that while I might find being downgrid a more comfortable, in type kind of an energy, I can be driven, I can be expressive, I can be amiable, I can rise to the occasion and morph into whatever the situation at hand seems to require. But when I'm left at rest, I'm probably going to just be that analytical type. And similarly, there are drivers that are out there that on the personality test, but that doesn't mean that those driver personalities don't have expressive moments and analytical moments and amiable moments, et cetera. So even though we have a personality, which gives us kind of like a home base location on the change grid energetically, the real question we want to explore is, well, I'll do it this way. You guys, when we've talked about personality typing before, I said to you that an early piece of research that I did, and this is a good 30 years ago, 35 years ago now, was I asked people who, after completing a psychometric experience, I asked them 2 questions. What did you test out to be? And how accurate did you feel, or do you feel that label is? And I kind of knew what I was going to hear for most of it, but what I was listening for was how frequently someone would say to me, well, I tested out to be a whatever, and now I can see how I turned out to be a whatever, but I really think I'm all of these things. It really just depends on the situation. And I heard that over and over again. It depends on the situation. It depends what I'm doing. It depends on what's going on. It depends, it depends, it depends, it depends. And so what that told me from that very moment was that the world did not need another personality typing system. It needed a system that gave us an opportunity to look at the situations. So if you're going to say, hey, I change based on the situation, well, where is the tool that allows you to look at all the different situations and how you might respond to those situations? And that's where the change grid came from. So instead of looking at the person, the change grid is looking at the situations. And yeah, the person's involved because it's obviously how they perceive the situations and how they are going to proceed in those situations. But just kind of know that's what the real difference is. We're not looking at the person, we're looking at the situation. And then we can say, given a particular situation, my energy may very well morph into an expressive driver. Or maybe it's going to be a driven analytical. It really all depends on the situation.
To me, what that speaks to, in health behaviors, when we're studying patients and why they won't change, I used a lot of sports medicine research behind it. And what you just described speaks to, like, there's natural work behaviors and or personalities. They're just unique to you as part of your DNA is what we call your default mode network. Yep. You'll snap back to that, right? Yep. But then there's a gap between that and what we can call your work style behaviors. That's, in other words, how you assimilate into the culture, how you assimilate to that working environment. The challenge becomes when we're seeing all these statistics about stress and burnout is if there's no recovery strategy, in other words, how you calm down from stress and that emotional intelligence that David was describing, then you're going to feel out of control. And we're seeing a lot of people that, they're going to physicians for stress-related treatment and medication because they don't have a recovery strategy. They don't spend time thinking from that perspective. And so it's just more work and more work and more work. And everything about productivity, often in a culture, the math is about addition when really the math should be subtraction. It should be, doing less things that don't create value, or figuring out how to minimize those things that create more stress, and managing yourself according to your ultradian rhythms. And that doesn't happen. So you need stuff like this here to help people understand situationally, this is where where you could be, and this is where you are now. Because when you ask that question, I'm thinking that's a trick question in a way, because I think it matches the industry. I think it matches the organization, so like healthcare, I would think, as a physician, we're looking for an amiable driver, when most of the time, most of these hospitals are run by MBAs. So they make business decisions, but it's not necessarily value-driven decisions for everyone. And I've seen that through the pandemic. And this is why physicians, nurses are burnt out today.
Yep, you're absolutely right. Absolutely right. And so again, we need to make sure that we can find a good match between the individual, the work, the environment. What is it that we're actually trying to create in the name of culture? Now, a couple of sessions ago, I said that for most companies, at least early on, I think that they probably gave a lot of pushback to conversations about culture. Like anything else, if it's a soft skill, you go back 2 decades or so, and people would think all that stuff is just a little bit too airy-fairy. It's not really something that's concrete enough. I just want my people to work. I just want them to produce more. It was difficult to even get them to think about doing something that would focus on culture or mindset or any of those other wonderful subjects that have come along. So there came a point in time, as I said a couple of sessions ago, that people thought, well, if I want more productivity out of people, then the way to get more productivity is to change the culture or support the culture to doing it. And so they view the focus on culture as a means to an end. So if they can create the ideal culture that matches the outcomes they're looking for, and then they can recruit and populate their team with people who work well in that culture, then all good things will happen. But that's what they thought. But they thought, no, culture is a means to an end. There are other companies, not as many as I would like there to be, but there are certainly plenty of companies out there that view culture as being the number one thing. They want to create a particular feeling, a particular vibe, a particular, environment, but environment in all the different ways it expresses itself. Because they believe that if I can create that ideal environment, then all good things will happen from there. So it won't matter what we're all about doing, because if I can get that environment to get those people, then we can do anything and we can do it well. How many of you agree that you've seen examples of both of those kinds of intentions?
Absolutely.
Companies?
Yep.
Yep. Now, is one better than the other, or is it just 2 different client projects?
I think there are common themes through productive cultures. I wish I could be more specific about it, but it is situational and dependent. I could see where an expressive analytical culture could be appropriate, and in another situation it calls for an expressive driver culture. But I still think, and I'm looking forward to hearing what everybody has to say, that there are common themes that run through productive cultures. I think like emotional intelligence.
Yep.
I think I think there's a point there for me, but I think the driver is, without sounding too woo-woo, so to speak, is that you're just honoring the humanity of the group, the culture itself. So in other words, I think Kathy talked about this before. If you treat culture as like just an instrument as opposed to a live thing, right? A live entity, there's a difference in expectations. There's a difference in one's regard for performance. But the productive cultures, if you note, everything about what they do has a strategy to it. Like there's a purpose, there's a connection to that purpose. And it's situational. So in other words, they can change rapidly. But when you see organizations that have these complex hierarchical structures, then information flows and everything that people need to make decisions doesn't have, there's no flow in it. And so there's lifeless.
All right. And so other thoughts about that? David, did you want to throw anything else in?
Well, organizational design is very important and has a direct impact on culture. So what Brian is saying is absolutely accurate. They have to be done in tandem to have the effect that you're looking for.
Exactly.
T, I have a different nuance that's coming to mind, and most of the productive cultures I've seen in the past have been really, really good at putting the right people in the right positions in their organization, right? So if you think about that in the context of an individual, they may have their own unique home base and what provides them less friction. But if their role fit isn't there, and they are being kind of putting a square peg in a round hole, trying to be in a role that they creates friction and stress for them, to what Brian was saying, they're not going to be optimally productive. And that may be a vital role, but it may be just not the right role for them. So I think one of the dynamics of cultural fit should be an assessment of whether this individual is in the right role.
Exactly.
Absolutely. In fact, we tested people for 3 areas of fit. There was role fit, task fit, culture fit, because all of those are 3 different expressions of the same thing that are all interconnected. So in other words, this is what I talked about before. There's a difference between acquisition behaviors. In other words, that's quite passive. When we're doing those kinds of things, we can research, we can do all this stuff all day. It doesn't take much. But application behaviors, when you're applying yourself to the role, there's a physicality, there's mental, there's emotional, there's definitely tension involved there. And so a lot of times what Boris is describing is that disconnect in between understanding these natural rhythms that you have, but then when you apply yourself to work, now some of that could be disrupted until you figure out and how to operationalize yourself with that role. And then you start to work on this whole interconnection, integration perspective. But until that happens, people can feel out of control. And we've seen that time and time again.
And to what Brian is saying there, I would just add that his component of culture fit, I think is super important. I view that as kind of the home base. Like if you don't fit the culture, the rest of it doesn't matter to me, right? Whether you fit the role or
right ahead. Yeah, T, go right ahead.
I was just going to say that there's a couple of things. Some people said the right job and all of that, but it has to be the right job, the right person at the right time. For instance, if an organization needs to have a strategic leader, they need to have a tactical person under them. Perhaps at this time, if another leader needs to be tactical and the person under that needs to be strategic, so that there's a balance of implementation and looking at the future. So not everybody is in the right job at the right time. I've been in jobs where, and I've seen it, where the person has the right fit, but it's not the right time because it's not fitting into what needs to be done at that time. And so the other thing is that I think a culture needs to have inquiry, not just emotional intelligence, but trying to understand, let's look at what we're not looking at. What questions are we not asking to get to the results that we need to have? So I just want to add on to those that have spoken and say, I think that there are other elements that need to be added.
Very good.
If I can comment on that, I really like what T said, and I think the conversation is very interesting. I think that there is a danger, this notion of culture fit feels very tidy, but there is a danger in culture fit in that those organizations that select for culture fit often find themselves stuck because they don't have the diversity and the capability to be agile because there's not enough different kinds of energy in the organization to adapt or to respond to the pretty volatile environments that we're facing on the outside. And I would say that agility has become, a much more important factor over time, particularly in our environment, than it has been in the past. And so I used to think, the whole notion of alignment strategy, culture alignment, and the organization around with it. But if it's too tight an alignment, if it's too tight a fit, that organization has little ability to respond, bend, do something different, act quickly in the face of change. And so, I just want to throw that out. I think that concept of agility is probably one of the most important things an organization can have from a cultural standpoint, and that's the ability to make choices depending on strategically where it needs to be and what the environment is calling it to do.
It's a great
Can
point.
I add to that?
I just throw one thing in and then you can carry on with it. But what I'm hearing Kathy say, correct me if I'm wrong, is that the more rigid a culture becomes, the less resilient it ends up being.
Well, it's the culture itself. It's not the culture itself. Well, yeah, the culture can be rigid, but also the systems around the culture can be rigidly reinforcing that culture in a way that they do not allow for differences and for differences of expression that are necessary to respond. So yeah, the tighter the fit, as nifty as that might sound to all of us, is not successful in our world today.
Look, I think what that gets down to is really being able to accurately define and analyze candidates that we're looking for fit. And fit is very broad. It's not just role fit or culture fit, it's manager fit, it's task fit, it's customer fit, and having the analytical skills to go in there and discern whether or not you have what you're looking for. That's the challenge that I see.
Okay. Now, Edie, what were you going to say?
Yeah, I was just going to say the Herman brain dominance people, HBDI, have done studies on that, and they found the highest performing teams throughout the world, not just the US, were people that had a balance of the four quadrants of the, thinking styles or
whole brain.
Yep. Put your whole brain to work in a business.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There you go. Good.
Yeah,
All right,
but the
so
fit idea though is not static. Because you think about military, right? So when I speak to the military leaders here in the DC area and ask them how do they prepare people for war, and these are the admirals and generals that teach at the War College, they have the VUCA world, and so they're looking for fit, but they're prepared for what they call VUCA: volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And so they're always in their own way prepared for change. But by fit, they're looking for people that fit these various aspects, but they drive that forward into some purpose and strategic organizational kinds of things that it can fit in with it. So it's not like.
And Brian, what you've just described fits at a very different spot on the change grid than perhaps another type of organization would. Very interesting. So
I would argue, Brian, that the military is probably one of the most successful at dealing with the VUCA issue while maintaining a certain kind of expertise, a certain core of competence, while responding better than most organizations that are out there based on the case studies and the people that I've talked to. I mean,
right.
They are
That's what I'm saying.
Model organizations. Yeah.
Right. That's exactly right. That's what I'm saying. So it doesn't have to be like a static thing when we're talking about fit. I guess is what I was expressing.
Yeah. Okay. And so I think, we've all put forth a very strong case for the fact that culture is not a one size fits all sort of a thing. It needs to be something that is a living, evolving adjustable kind of a thing in order for it to really serve the organization well in the present and in the long run as well. So that being said, do you believe then that every single energy on the change grid could be a productive culture for an organization to have? Or do you look at certain of these 16 and say, oh no, that would not bode well for the company's future? Now, I just wanted to plant that seed because I need to show you another diagram before we start to really dissect this, because what I want to say is, while there's all kinds of places on the change grid for culture to thrive, there are also places on the change grid where it has no hope.
We definitely don't want to go to the danger zones.
Yeah, that's my thought. So, I also want to just remind you of this. I would like to think that any culture that we're saying is an effective culture at a corporate setting, and perhaps in other settings as well, has to have a way of engaging people and getting things done. When I think about the engagement rings and say, way on the in-grid side of things, people are either pre-aware or, then they become aware. Maybe it's right in their face, hyper aware. Maybe it's very low. Awareness must lead to intention. If the awareness of what's going on doesn't stimulate you to formulate some way of operating, behaving, doing whatever, now you're aware of it, what are you going to do? Well, there's a statement of intention that has to happen. That intention has to lead to engagement. Otherwise, we know the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Intention doesn't really change anything in a concrete, tangible way. We got to get engaged, and ultimately we got to get some stuff done. So keeping all that in mind, let's go back to these 16 energies. And I think Kathy said, well, we can get rid of the danger zones for sure.
Yeah. I think an amiable culture might be a very unproductive culture.
All right, so let's think about that then. We'll start on the amiable side of things. Let's be severe. An amiable. Now, again, think of everything you know about amiables, or even what that word means. So everyone's very pleasant, cares about others, gets along with others, and the way that they end up feeling like they care is to be actively caring for others and wanting everyone to be caring and supportive and all that sort of a stuff. Okay, that could be a very fine basis for a support group of some sort, maybe. Maybe that's the culture you want to have in some sort of a self-help kind of thing. But even then, I think there should still be some direction that's involved. Otherwise, we're just getting together and having a care fest. What do you guys think?
With home health care and certain services, wouldn't that be a productive energy?
Well, I think again, I'm looking at amiable. I think that what you've just said when it comes to home health care and things like that, those home health care professionals are there to do certain things, to make sure that certain life skills are being practiced, that certain care issues are being delivered upon. So do you guys also hear there's kind of a driven element there?
Yep.
There's a job to be done. There's tasks to be accomplished. And so I would say driven amiable would do a better job of an amiable. Now, the amiable will sit there and hold the person's hand and listen to stories and share stories. And again, it'll be a wonderful care fest. So I'm not saying that it's not useful to have certain people that are out there purely in this role. And I'll give you an example of that. One of our hospitals around here before COVID, everything obviously changed with COVID, but during visiting hours, you could bring your family pet. So because they thought that, hey, if someone who's sick and in the hospital, unless there's some reason why there can't be their dog or their cat or whatever, then they think that that's a good thing to have. Well, maybe the relationship that the patient has with their animal in that setting is an amiable sort of a thing. It's just caring for one another. And
I think, with these times of national tragedy, amiables are important.
Yeah, as part of a support team or a support, when all you need is a listening ear, a caring spirit, that sort of a thing, without having an agenda other than to be there. There are situations where that would end up being right. So I'm glad you brought it up, because I do believe that every one of these exist because under a given set of circumstances, they could be the perfect place for a given activity to be. But when it comes to having an organization and think, can that organization do what that organization needs to do if the culture of the organization is amiable? Do you think it's missing something? Do you think you're going to encounter challenges?
I don't think an amiable culture could survive.
Okay, great. Other thoughts about that?
They're not doing anything.
Yeah.
I don't know that an amiable organization is even organized.
Right.
I just, it doesn't need any structure. It doesn't have. The moment I add any element of structure, someone has to be the one who suggested that. So maybe we're all getting together as a little feel-good sort of support group, but someone sooner is going to say, so when are we meeting next?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's a driver energy. They're trying to move something forward. What are we going to do next, etc. That's a driven, amiable energy. So there you go. So I'm saying that an amiable could be useful, but as a culture, an amiable culture would not bode well for an organization to thrive. Fair enough?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Let's go to the other.
Okay, there's one exception though, T. When I
Go ahead.
said that is my daughter-in-law is an RN, but she was acting as, I don't know, but it was some home health care.
Uh-huh.
All she did, it was a wealthy lady. She had coffee with her. She was there just to keep her company, and they paid her well. That's all she had
Right,
to
yeah.
do.
And again, there's
was
nothing.
smile.
Yeah,
Yep.
no. Again, let me just say that the amiable behavior set can be very valuable. Is it valuable as the structure, the cultural foundation for an organization?
Yeah. Okay.
So it's great that she did it, but how did she come to know to go and visit that gal?
Yeah.
You know,
Exactly.
someone had to organize something, and amiable
Right.
don't organize. So,
Right.
all right, let's go to the other extreme, a driven driver. How many of you would love to work for an organization with a driven driver culture?
Yeah. I tried that before with healthcare startups. That did not work.
Because what happens if the culture is all about push,
Burnout, burnout, burnout.
burnout,
Exactly.
frustration, exactly. Now, mind you, we've all seen plenty of TV shows. Most of the drama series we've seen on TV about law or law offices, whether it was LA Law or whatever, Suits or whichever one it happens to be. I look at the way they're working and I just kind of go like, I don't care how much money you're getting paid. I cannot imagine that as being my work style / lifestyle. That culture and me, I could never, ever do it. So
Isn't that a prominent energy in sales organizations?
I would say that certainly the driver energy is a very prominent energy in sales organizations, but that driven driver energy, again, the question is, what would it be like to work in a driven driver culture? So
It's Wall Street. It's Wall Street culture.
it's Wall Street. What was the real estate movie with Tom Cruise, like Coffees for Closers or whatever it was? Do you remember that line? And so there was some real estate movies that were exemplifying a driven driver.
Glenn Ross.
Glenn Ross. Right. Yeah. And so I would say to you that driven driver culture can be very productive. Arguments?
Nope.
But tough on the people.
But tough on certain people.
Right.
And other people thrive in that culture. So David, if your services were engaged for staffing and you knew that the client was a driven driver culture, you're going to bring in a driven analytical or an amiable expressive or
Probably not.
no, unless you're a driven driver, you are going to get chewed up and spit out if you don't just quit on your own. So because that culture is not tolerant of anyone's failures. It is not polite. It is not gentle. It is all those things.
Not forgiving.
Non-forgiving, highly competitive. If you look at the adjective map and see all the adjectives that are in the outgrade danger zone, keep in mind that driven driver energy is half in the danger zone and half okay under well moderated situations. But by and large, the driven driver energy could be profoundly successful. I mean, look where they live. They live in execution. Engagement is a given. So that culture definitely exists. But how many of you want to work in that culture? Anybody?
I think you can get pretty excited and thrive, but then you kind of die. My son was on Wall Street, and it was around the clock. There's no life work balance at all.
No.
And it's amazing how you adapt to it. You adapt to that tempo. You become that.
That's
but
right.
then you die. You burn out
You burn out or you get trapped because
those
kinds of positions with that kind of energy tend to be very lucrative. And if that's how if you've adjusted your living situation to require that level of income, you may very well be trapped in doing work that is taking its toll on you physically. That's why a great deal of people that are in that kind of a culture end up getting involved with drugs, gambling, philandering. I mean, there's all kinds of, remember, we can go around the change grid and talk about all the dysfunctional behaviors one is likely to encounter, all the addictive and behaviors. The driven driver tends to become addicted to the thrill of the chase. So gambling, anything like that at all.
I would like to just add one thing, and that is when a company is in that driven driver and they realize something's wrong and they get rid of that person and perhaps another expressive driver or amiable driver comes in to be collaborative and stuff, that organization can't take it because they don't trust it.
Nope.
So there has to be a real change approach, a plan to change it to accept and trust the new leadership.
Absolutely. Well, and I think another thing that Tim, I don't know, or T, I don't know if you were on the call when we were chatting about emotional intelligence, but the driven driver energy was not part of the emotional intelligence ideal locations. The driven driver tended to be too focused on their own desired outcome, not very communicative, not very participative,
right?
These kinds of things. And so I don't think it should be at all surprising that leaders of driven driver culture organizations are unaware that there are problems with the way they're doing things and wouldn't believe you if you showed them evidence that it's got problems, because this is what they've always known. This is what they're comfortable doing. And if you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen, that's how they tend to be. So I don't think they're very coachable. I don't think there's very much, and if I am the person who's brought on to change that culture, I imagine I'm going to be banging my head up against a wall for a good long while before I have any hope of penetrating the situation with a new idea.
Yeah, I've got one of those right now, T.
Yeah.
The four brothers who run this insurance agency, the oldest brother is a driven driver and the youngest brother is an amiable driver, but it is a sales culture, a driven driver culture.
Yep.
And the younger, the nephews who are trying to come in and contribute are just being run over like steam shovels.
Mm-hmm.
There's not much empathy in that culture.
Right. Now, again, when we talk about a culture, I think this goes back to what Kathy was sharing with us when I asked what some of the some of the behavioral qualities are of a culture. And I think Kathy was talking about that there's traditions, the patterns have been repeated for so long that they're kind of become just kind of like a given part of the fabric of the way the organization operates, that it has different ways it celebrates things, it has different events and all that sort of thing that all are designed to reinforce whatever that culture happens to be. And so we could look at the driven driver as a culture and say, what are some of its traditions? What are some of its behaviors?
Up or out.
Yeah, up or out. I can imagine there's a whole lot of, I want to say, infighting, but
Yeah.
after it's all done, everyone brushes it off and says, so are we going to go get a beer or what, you know? So it's more like that, I want to say,
The work hard, play hard concept.
yeah,
Mm.
exactly. And so no one takes offense to things and people say whatever they want to say. I'm sure lots of names are called. I'm sure that, you know, the air is somewhat blue with vulgarities, you know, it's just, that's that culture. That's that culture. So again, I'm going through these just so I can say to you, even though that's not a culture I would ever want to be part of, I know that culture does exist. And I know that culture does produce undeniable success for certain people in certain industries during a certain time frame, right? So if we look at investments 20 years down the road, who knows how people are going to actually be making their investments, et cetera.
But what I have found, T, is that when people are in that situation for a long time, it's as though that their work becomes their identity. And when they leave, they've lost their identity and who they are.
Yeah.
So there has to be some alignment between the values, vision, and the mission of an organization and my own personal to really achieve the things that I want to achieve. And when that's missing, then I call those people in what I've written about is corporate prisoner. They're a prisoner to what they have become.
Yep.
That's an interesting point that you just made. And when I asked the question of these professionals when they were part of our health behavior research, who's responsible for what T just described, no one had a good answer for that.
Yeah.
That was the interesting thing to me.
Yeah. And there is an answer, but they don't want to identify. They don't want to identify with it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks. Thank you.
So let me just shift in-grid a little bit and say, well, maybe the problem with the driven driver is that it's missing any kind of amiable energy. It's not expressive, it's not analytical, it's just this pure energy that can be overwhelming to others and even to the people that are involved in it. So if I said, well, how about expressive driver, amiable driver, and analytical driver? Is there a possibility that one of these might actually be a really good functioning kind of culture? And is it possible that more than one of those could be a really good culture? And under what circumstances would it be best? So
I think all three of them would, if there was a balance, because you want to understand the situation and the facts. You certainly want to be conscious of the people, and you want to be promoting and inspiring activity.
Right. And so I may favor one over the others depending on the kind of industry that I'm in, but any one of these three could serve quite well as a corporate culture. And again, I'm going to go back to the engagement rings. Part of that is because, and again, you guys have seen enough change grids to kind of know that all four of those quadrants, those driver quadrants, are right here where I'm kind of drawing a little square here. So that means everyone that's in the driver quadrant has either formulated an intention to do something, is actively engaged in doing whatever those things are, or is getting things done. So execution is just a very final form of engagement. There's lots of ways engagement expresses itself, but it's the active doing of those things necessary to reach the outcome. If you can just do it in one fell swoop, well, that's what execution is all about, finishing something. and doing it right on time. So right there, I kind of know that whether that group is a little bit expressive, they still have a strong intention, they still have the engagement, maybe downgrade their, it's all still present there. So the amiable is the one, or rather the amiable driver is the one that has the highest contributing energy when it comes to that amiable intention definition sort of thing. So that's what I'm looking at. I'm going like, okay, well, does a corporate culture, whether they view it as being a means to an end, or now that I'm building this perfect culture, what are we going to do? That word do implies something driven is going to happen. So I'm thinking that the ideal culture is going to end up having a strong driver element to it. Now, if we were talking about something other than an organization, a corporate kind of a setting, we might come up with others. And I want to allow that possibility. We'll go into more detail in our next call. But what if I'm just like a local group, and maybe I'm the local, I don't know, yoga club, or maybe I'm someone who's into a volunteer kind of an organization. I can kind of see that that might expand my possibilities even further in grid. But we're talking about a corporate culture that we'll think more often than not is part of a for-profit organization, or even they're not for-profit, they're for purpose. And they're out there doing it. That's going to be driver energies. All right, so do we kind of agree with that these three other quadrants are probably good spots?
I
Well,
would agree with that.
I agree with it. And my comment would be is any one of those could do as long as they have the capability to draw from the others situationally.
Yeah, wouldn't that be nice? I mean, and
And
maybe
so
that
comes with the kind of staffing and the freedom of staffing. And that's where you talk about placing people in the right roles at the right time.
right. And I think, was it T or did you, Kathy, say that, and I know this is my word, but that a culture needs to have an opportunity for disruption. You need kind of have like a caring disruptor who's going to come along and see something that others aren't seeing, or you know,
you need to have a space for that and the freedom to have that expressed.
Right.
so T, for me, I'm just thinking, a lot of leaders come out of the finance part of organizations. And, it's interesting, you don't often find CEOs and senior leaders coming from other disciplines.
Right.
Marketing.
Yeah. Sometimes.
Yeah.
But really, I guess the question we ultimately want to get to is, what particular industries would lean towards an analytical driver culture versus an amiable driver culture versus an expressive driver culture? We already talked about driven driver, forget them for just a second. But what kinds of industries might lend themselves to leaning in one of these ways? And
I think the financial services industry might be an analytical driver.
A little
And
bit
CSPs, Deloitte and Touche.
Yep.
Right. Yep. Right. Because we know that they're moving something forward, but it has to be grounded in something. And so if I want to have that culture, I want to make sure that the culture does something to honor the truth, appreciate the data, celebrate that sort of analytical behavior, that if you were downgrade too far, people would just dismiss you as being a bean counter. This is where we go like, no, we understand this, we respect this, we honor the data, we are a truth-led organization. Whatever that truth may be, you're talking about financial planning, etc. Whatever your truth may be, it is what it is, but from that we can build a plan to go forward. So that's our belief. Now, that last part I just said added another element. So it is what it is, but we believe that you can do anything you want to do. What kind of a message was that one? What energy was that message all about? All right.
Say it again, T.
All right. So we know what we know. We know the truth. This is the truth of your situation. If I stayed in that energy, I would just say, so that's the situation clinically, here's what you can do about it, blah, blah, blah. It's very whatever. But
Options.
if instead I say to you, but from where you are right now, anything is possible. What energy did I just add?
Sounds expressive to me.
Expressive, exactly right.
Very
Exactly right. And so a little bit of expressive energy could be in there. And maybe the answer is that the ideal culture is a culture that is allows for all three of these and a little bit, how about say half of driven driver, because part of it isn't in the danger zone, half of it's is very good stuff. So the right culture is one that includes elements of all four of these energies. And maybe we lean a certain way because of the kind of organization we are, but by and large, we appreciate that all of these ways of using your mind, all these energies, bring certain very valuable things to the organization.
You know, the interesting thing about those energies, T, is they can also conflict. I have a client that I think the CFO is an analytical driver and the CEO is an expressive driver.
Oh, that's very interesting.
And they bump heads because she will continuously come up with reasons not to do things or put things off. And of course, he's trying to inspire her to perform.
Yeah, and so I think there's going to be those kinds of conflicts. The question is, in the right culture, that conflict could be viewed as an opportunity for growth, for support, as opposed to being a negative sort of a thing. Because an amiable organization, what do you think they think about arguments?
They never have them.
No, yeah, no, no, we don't argue. We don't say anything negative. All right, so that's our time for today. I'm hoping you guys are finding this an interesting dialogue. The question is ultimately going to be, is that it? Or is this where we really believe the right corporate culture should exist? Or do we want to look at some of these, one in the next kind of band, if you will, on the Ingrid side of things? So might these be different or good cultures as well? So it just gets you thinking, would a driven analytical culture be better than an analytical driver, or other way around? What are we gaining? What are we losing? How does that change things? And I bring this up because I know one of you on the call deals with technical organizations that are based in other countries. And if I remember correctly, based on an Asian culture. And that shifted things in a great way when I had this discussion with you privately. So we'll see how that all fits in. So are these also good possibilities, or is it really these three that we're trying to ultimately create? We'll also talk about why this matters. But yeah, go ahead, Brian.
I have a quick question I would like to bring to my group since I'm foreign born. How would you consider, or what area would you say the American healthcare system culture-wise would be, just from your own perspective?
Oh, well, I can certainly say that I think that our healthcare system is driven by profit. And so it's going to probably be more analytical driver and driven driver.
Okay, interesting.
I don't believe while I believe that healthcare providers may have amiable energy,
right,
maybe some expressive energy, I do not believe that those energies are running the show.
No, because the whole talk is about, and these are conversations we've been having about the push from fee for service, which is based on volume, to value. But then you need the support of the government, who's the biggest, they're the biggest insurer through Medicaid, Medicare. So you need regulation and all those kinds of things. And the way it's set up doesn't support it. So that's what I'm trying to help them figure out in conversation.
Yeah, well, and we can talk about this in greater detail, because where does good healthcare live on the change grid, self-care, et cetera. But I will tell you that, Linda spends all of her time working on healthcare around the world. So she's part of the League of Women Voters. Her main area is about healthcare. And one of the things that they've said that I find very interesting, those of you that are parents will find this particularly interesting, or grandparents, is that within 2 generations, healthcare in the United States will become absolutely unaffordable by anyone. So unless something drastic changes, healthcare won't matter because it won't exist. So there comes a point in time that you simply can't fund it. And so you guys think about when you were first starting out. And again, yeah, if you work for a corporation, maybe you got some healthcare through them, but you guys are all privately employed. Who's giving you any kind? You got to go out there and get your own insurance. Well, what if you'd found out that even though you're independent and you're making really good money, that your health care was probably going to cost you, your insurance was probably going to cost you a couple of grand a month with crazy deductibles and copays along with it. How many of you could have afforded that when you first got started? Well, and that's when you're having kids.
Yeah.
So it ends up becoming an untenable situation. So if we don't do something proactively about it, sooner or later it has to change, or there will be no health care. It was probably more of an answer than you wanted, but there you go.
No, I love it. I love it.
All right. Okay, we're over time, so sorry about that. But we'll pick up where we left off on Thursday's call. Give some thought to Brian's question. Feel free to send him an answer. He's happy to get that stuff in his email. So, all right, so
have a happy Memorial Day, everybody.
Thank you. You too.
Bye for now.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye now.